Yu-jun was seconds away from disappearing into the safety of his armored SUV, leaving behind a marriage merger designed to cement his syndicate's power forever. But then, a waitress with no weapons and a fearless smile blocked his path, returning a piece of his soul he didn't know he'd lost. In one defiant moment, he would have to choose the cold crown of a king or the dangerous heat of a life he never thought he deserved. Inside the gilded silence of a New York high-rise restaurant, Yu-jun, the tattooed, untouchable leader of a soul syndicate, had just played his part. Across from him sat the perfect heiress, a union arranged to protect bloodline and empire. Emotion was weakness. Vulnerability was death. His plan was simple: walk away and return to a life of calculated shadows. But fate intervened. Amelie, a waitress with steady eyes and quiet courage, blocked his path to the getaway car. In her hand, his mother's lost locket. She had no army, no status, no reason to challenge him. Yet she stood firm. Yu-jun didn't push past her. He stopped. He looked. And in the Mafia world, one pause can rewrite destiny and paint a target in blood. Subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories. The heavy glass doors of Celestine hissed shut behind Yu-jun, cutting off the scent of expensive truffle oil and the suffocating pressure of his uncle's expectations. Outside, the New York air was biting, a sharp contrast to the staged warmth of the dinner he had just abandoned. His security team moved like shadows, 2 men flanking him, while a third held the door of the matte black SUV open. Yu-jun didn't look back at the restaurant. He didn't want to see the disappointed, polished face of the heiress still sitting at table 9. He was already reaching for the cold authority he used like a shield, his mind shifting back to the syndicate's logistics in Seoul. He was halfway into the leather interior of the car when a blur of white and black broke the perimeter of his guards. "Wait. Sir, please." The voice was breathless but firm. Yu-jun's lead bodyguard, Minho, moved instinctively to intercept, his hand reaching inside his jacket. "Stand down," Yu-jun commanded, his voice a low vibration that stopped his men instantly. He turned, his dark eyes narrowing. Standing just inches from the rear fender was the waitress, Amelie. Her hair was slightly windswept from the run, and her white uniform shirt glowed under the streetlights. She was tiny compared to the wall of muscle surrounding Yu-jun, yet she didn't flinch. She didn't look at the guards or the intimidating luxury of the motorcade. She looked directly at him. "You drop this," she said, holding out her hand. In her palm lay a small, tarnished gold locket. The chain was broken, dangling between her fingers like a golden thread. Yu-jun felt a physical jolt in his chest, a sensation more violent than any blow he had ever taken in a back-alley fight. He reached into his pocket, his fingers meeting empty space. He hadn't realized it was gone. That locket was the only thing he possessed that didn't belong to the Kim syndicate. Inside was a grainy, faded photo of a woman with a soft smile, his mother, taken before the world of shadows had claimed them both. He stepped toward her, invading her personal space, but Amelie didn't retreat. She simply waited, her expression open and sincere. As he took the metal from her, his fingers brushed hers. The contact was brief, but the warmth of her skin felt like a live wire against his cold, calculated reality. "I saw it fall near the coat check," she explained softly, her voice steady despite the intense gaze of the most dangerous man in the city. "I thought it looked like something you couldn't afford to lose." Yu-jun looked at the locket, then back at her. In his world, people only returned things if they wanted a reward or a favor. But Amelie just smiled, a genuine, grounded smile that reached her eyes, and began to step back. "Have a good night, sir," she said. Yu-jun watched her walk back toward the restaurant, her silhouette framed by the golden light of the windows. He remained standing by the open car door, the gold locket pressed firmly into his palm, feeling a strange, terrifying disruption in his chest. For the first time in 29 years, the boss of the Soul Syndicate forgot to give an order. He just stood there, watching her go, holding onto a piece of his soul he hadn't even known was missing. The following night, the staff at Celestine were on edge. The air in the dining room usually felt like velvet, but tonight it felt like a stretched wire. Yoo-jun had returned. He didn't arrive with the usual entourage of business associates or a high society date. He came alone. He sat at table 4, a small, unassuming spot tucked near the kitchen pass, a place where he had a direct line of sight to the service station. His presence was a silent thunder. The tattoos peeking out from his collar and the heavy gold watch on his wrist signaled a world that didn't belong in a room full of soft jazz and whispered conversations. Minho and the other bodyguards stood like statues near the entrance, their eyes scanning the room with a cold intensity that made the other diners finish their meals in record time. They were baffled. Their boss was the head of a syndicate that controlled half of Seoul's shipping lanes. He didn't do casual dining. He certainly didn't visit the same restaurant 2 nights in a row unless he was planning to buy the building or burn it down. Amelie appeared from the kitchen, balancing a tray of appetizers. She stopped short when she saw him. Unlike the rest of the staff, who moved around Yoo-jun as if he were a landmine, Amelie's shoulders relaxed. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She smoothed her apron and walked straight toward the most dangerous man in New York. "Back so soon?" she asked, her voice light and musical. "I hope you aren't here because you dropped something else." Yoo-jun looked up at her. To anyone else, his expression was a mask of stone. But for the first time, his eyes weren't scanning for exits or threats. They were focused entirely on the way the light caught the warmth in her skin. "The tea was acceptable," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was a lie. He hadn't even tasted the tea the night before. Just the tea. Amelie teased, leaning in slightly. "We have a honey lavender cake tonight that might actually make you smile. It's a tall order, I know, but I think the chef is up for the challenge." Yoo-jun watched her as she spoke. She talked to him like he was a person, not a headline or a threat. She didn't bow, and she didn't tremble. She just existed in her own space, bright and authentic. "Bring the cake," Yoo-jun ordered, though it sounded less like a command and more like a request. As she walked away, Minho leaned down, whispering urgently into Yoo-jun's ear. "Sir, the elders are calling from Seoul. They want a report on the merger meeting. They are asking why the SUV has been idling in Midtown for 3 hours." Yoo-jun didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at his guard. He kept his eyes on the kitchen door, waiting for a waitress with a bun and a bright smile to return. "Tell them I am occupied," he said softly. "Tell them the king is busy." The restaurant was quieter now, the late-night lull settling over the dining room like a soft blanket. Yoo-jun sat at table 4, his suit jacket draped over the back of the chair. For the first time, the rigid perfection of his silhouette was broken. With the jacket gone, the ink on his skin seemed to come alive under the warm amber lights of the restaurant. The tattoos crawled upward from beneath his white shirt, dark and intricate vines of black ink that wrapped around his throat and disappeared behind his ears. They were symbols of a life lived in the mouth of the storm, marks of rank, of pain, and of a history that left no room for soft things. Amelie approached with a fresh pot of tea, but she stopped before pouring. Her eyes didn't shy away from the ink. Most people looked at his tattoos and saw a warning label. They saw a monster or a king. But Amelie looked at them the way a jeweler looks at a flawed diamond, with curiosity and a strange, quiet empathy. "They're beautiful," she whispered, stepping closer than any stranger ever dared. "But they look heavy." Yoo-jun paused, his hand hovering over the table. "They are not meant to be light," he replied, his voice a low grate. "They are a record. In my world, you wear your choices on your skin so you never forget who you are." Amelie set the teapot down and leaned against the edge of the table. She wasn't looking at the patterns anymore. She was looking at the way his pulse thrummed against the dark lines on his neck. The silence between them wasn't the expensive silence of his business meetings. It was thick and heavy with a truth he hadn't spoken in years. "Can I ask you something, Yoo-jun?" she asked. It was the first time she had used his name without a title. It felt like a shift in the earth beneath his feet. He nodded slowly, mesmerized by her stillness. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "Not the needles. Not the ink. I mean, does it hurt to be you? To have to be this person every single second of the day?" June felt a sudden, sharp ache in his throat. It was the one question no one in the Soul Syndicate would ever dare to think, let alone speak. They asked him for orders, for money, for blood, and for protection. No one ever asked if the man behind the mask was in pain. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the calculated presence he had spent a lifetime building flickered. He saw her warmth, her simple black tie, and the way she stood so comfortably in a world that didn't demand she be anything but herself. Every day, he admitted, the words barely a breath. Amelie didn't pity him. She reached out, her fingers hovering just an inch from the ink on his collarbone, offering a phantom touch that felt warmer than the tea. Then maybe, she said, her voice like a promise, you should stay here a little longer. No one has to be a king at table 4. The following morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse suite was colder than the winter air outside. June stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the New York skyline, but his mind was back at table 4. He could still feel the phantom weight of Amelie's question. The heavy double doors swung open without a knock. June didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive tobacco and the rhythmic thud of a silver-tipped cane announced the arrival of Uncle Sang-hoon. He was the clan elder, a man who viewed the world as a chessboard where people were merely pawns to be sacrificed for the sake of the Kim legacy. You missed the breakfast with the Choi family, Sang-hoon said, his voice like dry parchment. He walked to the center of the room, his eyes sharp and judgmental. Min-ho tells me you spent your evening in a midtown kitchen, watching a girl serve soup. June turned slowly, his face returning to its mask of stone. I was observing the local territory, uncle. Nothing more. Sang-hoon leaned heavily on his cane, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Do not lie to the man who taught you how to breathe, June. You have a scent on you. It's not the scent of power or blood. It's the scent of hesitation. He stepped closer, pointing the silver tip of his cane toward the tattoos on June's neck. These marks weren't earned, so you could play house with a waitress. You are a king, and a king does not dally with the help. June felt the familiar tsunami of his family's expectations rising. She is not a distraction. She is irrelevant to the business. If she is irrelevant, then her absence should not trouble you, Sang-hoon countered. He turned to his own personal guard, a man whose face was a jagged map of scars. The girl at the restaurant. She is a smudge on the family name. Clean it. The room went deathly silent. June's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced his hands to remain still. In the syndicate, showing fear for someone else was a confession of love, and love was a death sentence. Uncle, the restaurant is high profile, June said, his voice dangerously low. A scene there would draw the wrong kind of attention from the authorities. Then do it quietly, Sang-hoon replied, walking toward the door. By tomorrow morning, I expect you to be at the Choi estate, signing the merger papers. This emotional disruption ends now, June. Remember who you are, or I will remind you in a way you won't survive. As the door clicked shut, June looked down at his trembling hands. The shadow of the elder had fallen over the only light he had found in years. He had less than 12 hours to save a woman who didn't even know she was in danger. He reached for his phone, his mind racing through 1,000 violent outcomes. He had spent his life being a weapon for his family, but for Amelie, he would have to become a shield. The sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, painting the clouds in bruised purples and deep oranges. June didn't go to the restaurant as a customer tonight. Instead, he waited at the service entrance in a nondescript car, his heart tight with a pressure he couldn't name. When Amelie stepped out, looking exhausted, but still carrying that light in her eyes, he didn't give her a choice. He simply opened the door and said, "Come with me, please." He took her to a building that didn't have a name, only a high-security keypad and a silent elevator that rose 60 stories in seconds. When the doors opened, they stepped onto a private rooftop that felt like the top of the world. The wind was colder here, whipping Amelie's hair around her face, but the view was breathtaking. All of Manhattan was spread out beneath them like a carpet of fallen stars. "This is mine," June said, standing at the edge of the glass railing. He didn't sound proud, he sounded tired. My family owns this building, and the three next to it. I spend my days looking at these lights, calculating their value, and planning how to keep them. Amelie walked to the edge, her breath hitching as she looked down at the river of yellow taxis far below. She looked at the city with wonder, but when she turned to look at June, her expression softened into that same empathy that had unnerved him at table 4. It's beautiful, she whispered, but you're looking at it like it's a prison. It is, he admitted, finally letting his shoulders drop. I own the view, but I can never go down there and just walk through the park. I can't sit in a cafe without 4 men checking the exits. I see everything, but I feel nothing, except when I'm at your table. He turned to her, the gold chain at his neck catching the last of the light. There is a different kind of danger coming, Amelie. My world is starting to notice you. They see you as a weakness because you are the only person who makes me want to stop being a king. Amelie didn't back away. She reached out and took his hand. Her palm was warm, a sharp contrast to the freezing wind. I'm not afraid of your world, June. I'm only afraid of you disappearing back into it. For a moment, the Mafia boss and the waitress were the only 2 people left in the world. He looked at her, and the city lights seemed to fade. He realized then that he didn't want to own the buildings anymore. He wanted to own a life where he could hold her hand without wondering if a sniper was watching from the roof across the street. But as the shadows grew longer, he knew his uncle's men were already moving. The piece of the rooftop was a lie, and the storm was about to break. The golden piece of the rooftop felt like a lifetime ago, when June pulled the car onto Amelie's street later that night. His instincts were screaming, a cold prickle at the back of his neck that usually only came before an ambush. He watched Amelie walk toward her front door, but as she reached for her keys, she froze. The door was already slightly ajar, the wood around the lock splintered and raw. Stay behind me, June commanded, his voice turning into a sharp blade. He didn't wait for her to argue. He pushed into the small apartment first, his hand moving to the hidden holster beneath his jacket. The sight inside was a calculated mess. This wasn't a robbery for money, it was a message. Amelie's cookbooks were torn and scattered across the floor like wounded birds. Her small dining table was overturned, and the flour she used for her baking practice had been thrown against the walls, creating a ghostly white dust that hung in the air. In the center of the room, a single black orchid, the signature flower of the Kim syndicate, lay crushed on the floor. Amelie let out a small, broken sound, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at the wreckage of her life, her safe space violated by a world she didn't understand. I told you, June whispered, his voice thick with a mix of fury and self-loathing. I told you my world was dangerous. He turned to look at her, but for the first time, he didn't see the woman who made him feel human. He saw a victim. He saw the smudge his uncle wanted to erase. The realization hit him harder than any bullet. As long as he was near her, she was a target. His presence was the poison in her life. You can't stay here, he said, his voice becoming suddenly cold and distant. He forced himself to look away from her watering eyes. My men will take you to a hotel. And then tomorrow, you need to leave the city. Leave. Amelie's voice trembled. June, we can fix this. We can talk to them. There's no talking, he barked, the sound echoing off the bare walls. He used the harsh tone he reserved for his underlings, a mask of stone sliding back over his features. Look at this room, Amelie. This is just a warning. Next time, it won't be your books. It will be you. He stepped back, physically putting distance between them. Every cell in his body wanted to pull her into his arms and promise to protect her, but he knew that promise was a lie. To save her, he had to make her hate him. He had to push her away so far that the syndicate would believe she no longer mattered to him. Go with Minho, June said, his eyes as blank as a winter sky. Don't come to table 4 again. Don't look for me. You were right, it hurts to be me. And I won't let it hurt you too. He walked out of the apartment without looking back, leaving her standing in the dust of her broken dreams. As he climbed into his car, he felt the gold locket in his pocket heavy and cold. He had found a piece of his soul, only to realize he had to throw it away to keep it alive. The following morning, Yu-jun sat in the cold, sun-drenched library of the Choi estate. Before him lay a stack of legal documents, the marriage merger, that would bind two empires together through ink and blood. He looked down at his hands, which still felt the phantom warmth of Amelie's skin, contrasting with the icy finality of the papers. The door opened, and Sophia Choi walked in. She was perfectly composed, her hair swept back into a sleek, expensive style that left not a single strand out of place. She looked exactly like the woman his mother and uncle wanted for him, a queen designed for a boardroom. But as she sat across from him, Yu-jun noticed the way her fingers trembled as she reached for a tea. "You've been distracted, Yu-jun," Sophia said softly. Her voice didn't hold the jealousy of a woman scorned. It held the weariness of a fellow soldier. "My father is pleased with the terms, and your uncle is already celebrating. But you look like a man waiting for his own execution." Yu-jun leaned back, his eyes dark. "This is a business arrangement, Sophia. My personal feelings are irrelevant." Sophia let out a short, hollow laugh. "Personal feelings? We aren't even allowed to have those. Do you think I want this? To be traded like a piece of high-end real estate to ensure my father's hotels keep their funding?" She leaned forward, the mask of the perfect heiress slipping for a brief second. "I saw you at the restaurant. I saw the way you looked at that waitress. It wasn't the look of a boss. It was the look of a man who had finally found the air he needed to breathe." Yu-jun remained silent, his jaw tight. "I am a prisoner too, Yu-jun," Sophia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The dress I wore that night cost more than a car, but it felt like a suit of armor I could never take off. We are the same. We were born into golden cages, and we are being told to sing for the people who hold the keys." She reached out not to touch him, but to slide the folder closer to him. "If you sign this, you aren't just protecting your empire. You are killing that man I saw in the restaurant. And once he's gone, he isn't coming back." Yu-jun looked at the signature line. He thought of Amelie's trashed apartment and the black orchid his uncle had left as a threat. He thought of the expensive silence that had defined his life before her laugh shattered it. "Why are you telling me this?" Yu-jun asked. "Because," Sophia said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, "one of us should at least try to be happy. If you have the strength to burn this cage down, do it. Because I don't think I ever will." She walked out, leaving him alone with the silent documents. Yu-jun picked up the pen, the weight of the gold watch on his wrist feeling like a shackle. He realized then that Sophia wasn't his enemy. She was his mirror. And the reflection was starting to break. The library was silent, but the air felt like it was vibrating with a hidden threat. Yu-jun stood over the unsigned documents, his heart heavy with the realization that his golden cage was narrowing. He reached for his phone to call Minho and check on Amelie's safety, but before he could dial, a video message arrived from an unknown number. He pressed play, and the world seemed to tilt. The footage was shaky, showing the interior of a cold, concrete basement. In the center of the frame, Amelie was zip-tied to a wooden chair. She wasn't crying. Her jaw was set in that same defiant line he had seen at table 4, but her eyes were wide with terror. Behind her stood the man with the jagged scars, his uncle's shadow. A voice like dry gravel came through the speaker. "The smudge proved difficult to clean, Yu-jun. She has a spirit that doesn't belong in our world." The video cut to black, and a text followed immediately. "The Choi merger is no longer enough. Sign over your voting shares and your inheritance to the Elder Council by midnight. If the papers are not signed, she will be erased. If you call the police, she will be erased. Choose your empire or your heart." Yu-jun felt a cold, murderous calm settle over him. This was the fitness clause of his own life. His uncle wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for Yu-jun's soul. To sign meant losing the power to protect anyone ever again. To refuse meant losing the only person who made that power worth having. Minho burst into the room, his face pale. "Sir, we lost the tail on the transport vehicle. They used a jammer." "I am so sorry." "It doesn't matter," Yujun said, his voice a hauntingly quiet rumble. He looked at the gold watch on his wrist, then at the locket in his pocket. He realized that for 7 years he had been a prisoner because he was afraid of what he would lose. But now he knew exactly what he was willing to throw away. "Get the car," Yujun commanded, stepping toward the desk. He didn't pick up the pen to sign the merger. Instead, he pulled a hidden drawer open and retrieved a secondary burner phone and a tactical map of the syndicate's private holdings. "Are we signing, sir?" Min-ho asked, looking at the documents. "No," Yujun said, his eyes glowing with a dark, predatory light. "My uncle wants a ransom. I'm going to give him a war instead." He left the perfect documents on the table, unsigned and mocking. He was done playing the role of the obedient heir. Amelie had asked him if it hurt to be him, and now he was going to show the world exactly how much it hurt to cross him. He wasn't going to her as a king. He was going to her as a man with nothing left to lose. The black SUV tore through the industrial district of Queens, its headlights cutting through a thick layer of fog. Yujun sat in the back, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him, Min-ho was checking the magazines of his weapon, but Yujun's only weapon was the burner phone in his hand and the secret knowledge he had kept for a decade. He wasn't going to fight his uncle with bullets alone. He was going to dismantle the very foundation of the Kim syndicate. "The location is the old textile warehouse near the docks," Min-ho whispered. "It's a fortress, sir. They have at least 20 men inside." "They have 20 men who follow orders," Yujun replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "But they follow those orders because they believe in the strength of the Elder Council. I'm about to show them that the Council is a hollow shell." As they reached the perimeter, Yujun didn't order a frontal assault. Instead, he executed the Ghost Protocol, a contingency plan he had designed years ago to be used only if the syndicate turned on itself. With a few taps on his phone, he triggered a massive internal data leak. Encrypted files, offshore bank accounts, and records of his uncle's secret betrayals against other clan members began flooding the tablets of every high-ranking officer in Seoul. Inside the warehouse, chaos erupted before Yujun even stepped out of the car. The guards' phones began buzzing with the news. Uncle Sang-hoon was being purged by the council for embezzling clan funds. The loyalty that held the fortress together dissolved in seconds. Yujun kicked the heavy steel doors open, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights of the city. He walked through the warehouse with a terrifying calm. Guards stepped back, lowering their weapons, confused and fearful of the man who seemed to be destroying his own empire in real time. He reached the basement stairs and found his uncle's personal guard standing over Amelie. The man raised his gun, but Yujun didn't flinch. "Your paycheck just disappeared," Yujun said, his eyes glowing with a predatory light. "And your boss is a dead man walking. Choose your next move very carefully." The guard looked at the vibrating phone in his pocket, saw the chaos on the screen, and stepped aside. Yujun rushed to Amelie, his hands trembling as he sliced through the zip ties. The moment she was free, she collapsed into his arms. She smelled of cold concrete and fear, but she was alive. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair, holding her so tightly it felt as if he could merge their souls. "It's over. All of it. You came for me," she sobbed into his chest. "I burned the world for you," Yujun corrected. He looked around the empty warehouse. By triggering the protocol, he had destroyed his own inheritance and made himself a ghost in the eyes of the law and the Mafia. He was no longer a king. He was just a man, holding the only thing that had ever truly mattered. He walked her out of the ruins of his former life, leaving the gold watch and the syndicate behind in the dust. 6 months later, the salty air of a small coastal town in South Carolina felt cleaner than the filtered oxygen of a Manhattan penthouse. The roar of the city and the expensive silence of the Kim syndicate were distant echoes, replaced by the rhythmic sound of the Atlantic tide hitting the shore. Yujun stood behind the counter of a quiet, sun-drenched storefront. He wasn't wearing a sharply tailored suit or a gold chain. Instead, he wore a simple black t-shirt with the sleeves rolled up, fully revealing the intricate ink that climbed his arms and neck. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to hide them. They weren't a record of his crimes anymore. They were just a part of a man who had survived a storm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his gold watch, the last remnant of his life as a king. It was a masterpiece of engineering, worth more than the small bakery he and Amelie had just opened. He looked at it for a moment, then set it inside a glass jar on the back shelf. He didn't need to track the seconds of a merger or the timing of an extraction anymore. Here, time was measured in the rising of dough and the cooling of cakes. Amelie emerged from the kitchen, wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek, a sight that still hit June like lightning every time he saw it. She looked at him and smiled, her expression warm and grounded. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the owner of Sweet and Soul, and the light in her eyes was brighter than any diamond June had ever bought. "The honey lavender cake is ready," she said, leaning against the counter. She looked at the tattoos on his neck, then up at his eyes. "Are you still hurting, June?" He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. "No," he said, and for the first time, the word was true. "I finally know what it feels like to just be me." They had left the world of shadows behind. There were no bodyguards at the door, no uncles making threats, and no strategic marriages. There was only the smell of fresh bread and the quiet peace of a life chosen, not assigned. June had traded an empire for a bakery and a crown for a home. As he pulled Amelie into a gentle embrace, he realized that he wasn't her protector anymore. She was his anchor, and they were finally free. Thank you for your time. Please comment, like, and subscribe to my channel for more content.